every time, but I know that you'll do your very best, and I know that you will keep your oath of office, and that you will be honorable in your best efforts to carry out my wishes. So I am a little bit offended by the Republican candidate not showing up. In my humble opinion, it shows incredible disrespect for the voters, for the position, for the oath of office, and I could continue. So a big shame goes out to the Republican candidate in the state of Utah. I guess Republicans just think that, hey, there is no need for a debate, there is no need to meet and greet, there is no need to run for office because I'm a Republican and therefore I got it sewed up. And I find that very disappointing. It's not healthy for the discussions, for the campaigning, and it's not healthy for the voter. So with that, I guess I would leave it to the other two candidates to state the positions the best they can of the missing candidate. And if they're not too fairly represented, I can't help that. However, in order for you to articulate your position as candidates, you will need to explain how you are different from the candidate that's not present. I know that's not a fair representation of the missing candidate, but there's no other way unless we're going to go hunt down their papers and see what they have written on their positions. So we'll just have to do our very best and let you compare and contrast your views to that candidate's views that's not here as well. So without further ado, what I want to do is I want to start out, kind of lay out the rules of the debate, if you will. My name is Sam Bushman. I'm a nationally syndicated talk show host. I'm the moderator for this debate. My talk show is libertyroundtable.com, just so people know who I am. And I've been a public speaker for a long time, a nationally syndicated talk show host, and have served in a variety of other capacities as well. I want to basically say that this debate will be a little different than normal. And what I mean by that is normally you have a timekeeper. Strict time is kept and accounted for and expected to be obeyed in terms of the time restrictions. Since there's only two candidates, we'll have a little looser time frame. But we'll try to follow the general idea where each candidate will give an opening statement. After the opening statements, then we will start to have questions from me, the moderator, and then I would like to see if we can't get questions from the audience as well. And then I would like to have the opportunity for you as candidates to question each other and respond. If in your responses somebody's name or another candidate's name is mentioned, they will have the opportunity to respond in kind as well. Finally, we'll have any final questions and closing statements from each candidate. Now what I want to do is let you introduce yourself. So as a candidate, you say your name, and then we will go from there, and I will refer to you as the party's candidates. I'll say Democratic candidate, or I will say Independent American candidate. And the reason I'm doing that is because if somebody's listening to this back on audio, they won't know who's who if I don't do it that way. So I will say the candidate by party name. You will then say your name as you respond. And that way, for anybody who listens to this in audio later, there won't be any confusion. Hopefully that will make sense. And with that, we will start. We'll start opening statements, which will be 2 to 3 minutes long from each candidate. Then you will have 2 minutes to answer each question. And if your name is mentioned in the response, you'll have a minute to respond, and we'll go from there. Let's start with the Republican candidate first. I know he's not here, so we're going to wait for just a little bit of silence and show how he's not even interested at all. And I mean that. See, the media should be running with that and saying, you know what? That's a serious problem in America. How do the people get the opportunity to question the candidate and to have a debate back and forth to vet ideas and discussions? You can't. So the next one will be the Democrat candidate. We'll let him start. He will give his name, and then he'll make his opening statements.
Thank you, Sam. Appreciate it. Scott Farron. Why am I running for office is an important question. My party called me at 4:30 on the last day of filing and said there will be no one whose name will appear if you don't do it. I suggested some other people, and I said it's too late. And so because of my respect for the process, because I believe there's value in checks and balances. I don't think the founders necessarily wanted political parties. They might have, if I think of the founders as Madison and others, they might have not seen that as a good thing. They'd call it a faction of a majority or a minority. They didn't like either faction. But now that they exist, I think two parties or a viable third party is a check and balance. It'd be useful in this state especially. And so I let my name go on the ballot. By the way, before I knew Norm would be the candidate, the Republican candidate, Norm Thurston because he's a friend. We work together in Boy Scouts and a lot of church and other things together. But I believe that someone behind me ought to come and be elected. So I'm not asking for your vote. I don't particularly want to be a state legislator. However, I'm willing to do it if I were elected, and I would do it without being cynical. I would do it with the same spirit in which I would do jury duty. And I tell my law students and friends and others, don't avoid jury duty, even though there are ways to get out. But if that happens, then evil happens. Bad things happen. So I'm a professor at BYU. I'm an adjunct professor of law at the Jerome Clark Law School, and I'm a full professor at the David O. McKay School of Education, where I teach education law and the issues involved. The thing that drives me and interests me, and is why I would like to see more other than Republican candidates make it into our legislature, is because I, for example, if I were elected, don't get anything positive from being elected. It doesn't help my business. In fact, BYU requires me to go to an 8-month contract. And so I have to lose a whole lot of my pretty hefty salary. They're very generous with me. It would cost money. Nothing I would do would inure to my benefit. Well, you know what? I think it'd be good if we had a lot of people like that. I think it'd be better if we took everyone that serves on a PTA and replace them with the same number in the state legislature. And then we had them in 2 to 4 years turnover. So I frankly am a conservative. I'm a Goldwater Republican, but there is no such thing anymore. So now I'm a conservative Democrat. And I believe in fiscal responsibility. I believe in families and family values. I believe in public education. I like there to be choice and appropriate amounts of choice, but there needs to be a good system. And virtue requires that we fund it appropriately. It's like, and I have horses, it's like bringing in a great farrier and veterinarian to explain why the horse is stumbling. And they talk about great, conformation traits and some fancy shoeing, when the reality is, it's starving to death. And public education in Utah is starving to death. So we don't need a lot of fancy answers, we need some hay. And we need self-interest to get out of the state legislature, and we need virtue. Thank you, and I appreciate having my candidate here because I trust him and his virtue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. That's candidate Farron for House District 64 in Provo. We'll move now to the Republican candidate, and the reason we're going to him next is because his name was mentioned. That's right, nothing but silence. That's how he wants to represent himself, ladies and gentlemen. He has nothing to say to the people he wants to serve. Just want to make that very clear. We'll now move to the Independent American Party candidate. Start with your name, please, sir.
Jason Christensen. I have to be honest, I didn't plan a opening statement. This is going to be straight off the cuff. But, and I am humbled with the very kind remarks from my opponent, the Democrat opponent, Scott Farron, with his kind comments towards me as a person. And we do have some similarities, such as believing that we do need to take party out of politics. And get back to the founding document. And I'm also one that doesn't believe in labels. I don't like labeling myself or anyone else. But if I have to do a label for myself, I would say I am exactly what the founders were, which were constitutional moderates. Not left, not right, just what the law says. And conservative to boot. The reason why I'm running, I really didn't really have the desire to run, but but being a very religious person, it did come through personal revelation that I did need to run. I did need to step up and do something, because all is not well in Zion here in Utah. Debts and deficits keep rising. Federal government overreach keeps overreaching. The abuses at local city, county, and states keep occurring. Things are not right. And as a small business owner for 14 years, selling car oil, home audio, consumer electronics, it's not the best time financially for me either to serve, but it is a duty. Yeah. And because it is a duty, because I am just as badly hurt by this economy like the rest of the middle class, the poor, and yes, even some rich out there. You know, the American people are hurting, the American people are suffering because of this economy. Someone needs to actually rise to the challenge and speak for their cause and enforce the Constitution, which we haven't done and which we need to do. There are certain issues currently that are being talked about within the Republican Party in this state. There's a very bad piece of legislation that keeps coming up that will violate everyone's property rights. There is a very bad threat called the Constitution, a call for one ambiguous constitutional convention coming from the Republicans here in the state of Utah. When there is a very peaceful terminology called notification, which is, in layman's terms, the state standing up, enforcing the Constitution, and saying, federal government, you're outside the bounds of the law, and here's your ticket to please vacate. So I don't really have much more to say for introduction, but.
Thank you very much, Mr. Christensen. All right, so what I want to do is we've identified a few topics in the opening statements that of course we'll be covering. We'll be covering the economy, we'll be covering nullification, we'll be covering education, etc. But I have several questions that are more fundamental before we start into the debate based on ideas of the candidates, and that is as follows. You know, when you become a candidate, you have the opportunity to be elected. And with that opportunity to be elected comes a very serious charge on election day. Or I should say on swearing-in day. And that is the oath of office. And so I'd like to start with the oath of office. And since we had the opening statement by the Democrat first, we'll go to the Independent American Party candidate first. I want you to tell me what you understand your oath of office to mean and how you intend to keep it. So what the oath of office means to you and how you intend to keep it. But we'll start there because in my opinion, you know what, if we set partisan politics aside, if we set the discussion about issues aside, fundamentally how you keep your oath of office and what it means to you should be critical to the voters. So we'll start with the Independent American candidate, Mr. Christensen.
Well, the oath of office, which is, you know, let's look at what it is. It's a promise. And what other promises are there? Those are promises to God, those promises to our spouses. It's a covenant. It's an oath. It's a promise. You know, if we were to go to our spouse at home and say, honey, I was 80% faithful to you last month, was that acceptable? Absolutely not. But so many politicians, you know, have that type of so many politicians treat the oath of office in exactly that form. It doesn't mean anything to them. The oath of office is supposed to be that sacred, as sacred as marital vows. It's sacred as marital vows, as sacred as promises that we make with God. You know, and those. So that's, I'm not sure what else to answer the question, but it's, and I'm the type of person that's, my personal views is, I could be more of a 1950-ish type of person where one's word is one's bond. It's golden. What you say is what you do. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it.
All right, and I think the oath directly relates to honesty and to the Constitution. Thank you, that was the Independent American Party candidate. Now we'll move to the, I could mock the Republican Party candidate a little bit more for the sound of silence, but they did that very well in the 60s, so I'll leave that alone. And we'll move to the Democratic Party candidate now. Say your name and the question, just to recap the question, your oath of office. How do you intend to keep it and what does it mean to you?
Well, I'm very pleased at the depth of the question, because I think it's central to what it means to serve in a republic like this. So there's two ways. So first, fundamentally, I agree with Jason, and I hope it's all right to call him Jason. We had lunch together. We found a lot of common ground, and I feel, and I've seen around my neighborhood canvassing. That's very respectful, in my opinion. And so I believe, like him, that it's a sacred duty. That when you make an oath, you say, I will not seek my own. I won't feather my own nest. I will do what my conscience dictates. But then it might be, and again, it's in philosophy of of politics or background, that it tends to divide, although there's more than two ways. People that believe in being a Republican sort of representative of Republican virtue. And I was elected, so I vote my virtue, what it tells me to do, or being a pure representative. I find out what people in my district want, and I kind of put together an average of that, and I try to represent them. Well, I think both are important, and I don't think you should do one or the other, but do that which you think, as Thomas and Jefferson said, is that we're required to, before God, know the uprightness of our abilities and our duties. And so for me, I would tend to say, I try to think about what fellow members of my neighborhood, and they would mostly be Republicans, let's be honest, what they'd want to have happen here. Not what Republican leadership or Democratic leadership, with which I have problems in both cases, but what would regular neighborhood people want if they were like a PTA that said, here's what I'd like to have us do about parks. Here's what I'd like us to have do about families. Here's what I'd like us to do about adoption. Here's what I'd like us to do about public education. So that's how I see it now.
Thank you. The next question relates specifically to, and by the way, I'm not going to have a response when somebody compliments the other candidate, because how are you going to respond? Thank you for complimenting me. Okay, so when there's a disagreement or a statement made that somebody takes opposition to, then it can be response time to clarify ideas, not to argue. A debate isn't an argument, and it's not a Jerry Springer show. A debate is a discussion, ladies and gentlemen, about ideas, beliefs, understandings, purposes, goals, accomplishments, desires to accomplish, things that you will work towards, and articulating those ideas in an effort to have voters believe you're their person. You're the one that can accomplish those things for them. So I want to talk about the state of Utah and the District of Provo, 64 in specific. And the reason I want to talk about that is because it seems like in our society, everything gravitates towards the bigger and the more and the bigger and the more. And politicians do this, they run for office, they get elected, and it's merely just a stepping stone to their next, quote, elected office, and they get this career rolling, and it's like, how do we just roll uphill and eventually become, a governor of the state or somehow a federal congressman for the state of Utah, etc. So here's the question. How will you make sure that you represent your District of Provo in the state of Utah, as opposed to eventually gravitating towards national issues and or a stepping stone for a career? So I'm going to state the question now that I've kind of articulated it in a more simple manner. How are you going to make sure that you represent Provo, a district in the state of Utah, and make sure that that's where your focus is? We'll now move to the Democratic candidate first. It'll be his response, and then the Independent American. State your name as you go.
You want me to state my name each time? Is that what you said?
Yeah, I know that's a pain, but when there's only audio later, it's the only way they'll be able to keep track of who's who.
Thanks.
So thank you.
Scott Farron, the Democratic candidate. I really appreciate the depth of the question. So how am I going to do that personally myself? Step one, I will promise, if elected, to serve one term. And I might serve 2 terms, and I will promise I will not serve more than 2 terms. So, for me, it can't be. I promise I will not serve more than 2 terms, and I may not serve a 2nd term. But I promise I'll serve 1 term with real virtue and paying attention and going to meetings, some of which may be boring, some of which may be thrilling. And so for me, I am tired of a legislature that goes to the national legislative assemblies and comes back with the latest idea. And I was in a meeting today where we're dealing with what they're going to do about educational leaders, because they went to the National Assembly of Legislators, and now they've got another new idea. I'm tired of the reform cycle. You know, I again would say it's not fancy shoeing for that horse. We need to throw some more hay over the fence, and that horse might walk better. We need to show more respect to the teachers. We need to make that workplace for them a little more responsive, and we need to have accountability. I understand. So for me, guaranteed, I don't want to be a state legislator, and I don't want to be any politician after that. And so I would like, by the way, to have a state legislature filled with those kinds of people. And I don't think Jason is necessarily on the way to wanting to do something else big, you know, but he might, I don't know. But in my opinion, that's, and by the way, I believe this district includes Springville, so it's Provo and Springville. I think it's kind of long in the sense that, in that sense. So I would try to represent them, and then I try to get out of the way and ask and try to help develop someone again behind me that could take the, you know, the baton and go forward.
Thank you very much. All right, the Independent American Party candidate, state your name and continue. I'll repeat the question just for clarity's sake. How do you intend to make sure that your focus is on District 64, Provo and Springville, and how do you make sure that it doesn't become about national issues, et cetera, et cetera? How are you going to represent your district at the state level?
Jason Christensen. Well, we are living in a technological era where Facebook, social networking is key and prime. Almost everyone's on social networking. So, and I have my like page, and I have my personal page, and I fully intend to pose questions as to different topics that's being talked about on the at the legislature, different bills that's going to be introduced at the legislature for public opinions. And so that way I can take in all those opinions and weigh it, you know, take those opinions along with what's constitutional and do the right thing in that aspect. As for future elections, I am a fan of how George Washington was elected, where the people wanted him to serve once, the people wanted him to serve twice, and then he voluntarily stepped down. So and in this day and age with so many abuses, it's hard to step down if the people continually want you and you're continually peeling back layers of all the abuses upon the citizenry. So I have to do what the people tell me to do. If the people want me to run one term or two terms or go for this seat or that seat, I have to do what they tell me. Them along with God.
All right, thank you. We're going to move into some topics to try to get a little debate going on here. So far, the candidates really, they're saying, hey, I want to be around for 1 or 2 terms. I'm going to take care of my local business. I don't really have any political aspirations per se in terms of a career. You know, we agree that party has really become kind of a problem in America because at some point the leadership of parties dictate what people do. You guys are saying, you know what, I'm my own man. That won't happen to me. I'm really a member of a party because that's what you got to do to be on the ballot at this point. I respect all that. I respect that you'll be local, that you'll deal with your district's issues. So the next question is going to be very interesting in terms of, what do you intend to do? You know, in sports we say it's offense and defense. And the best offense is defense. The best defense is offense. And the best idea is to score more points than the other guy. That's how you win. So as long as I get that done, I'm in good shape. Do you plan to be an offensive candidate or a defensive candidate, number one? And number two, do you have bills in mind that you intend to put into the hopper? What would you like to accomplish? Do you have bills you want to pass? And we'll start with the Independent American Party candidate first. So the question clearly is this: do you have any bills you intend to put in the hopper? And do you intend to be an offensive or defensive servant of the people?
Well,
state your name.
Jason Christensen. You can look at it at both sides, offensive and defensive, because there's a lot of abuses that come through the average 600 new laws that the legislature has been passing each year. So someone needs to be up there saying no and speaking up against it continually. But in regards to the current abuses, offensive is a great way to go, and yes, I do have a number of pieces of legislation I will be sponsoring the minute I get in, such as nullification of Obamacare. And as a type 1 diabetic that's self-employed, my expenses keep going up and up and up, and especially now with that monstrosity. The answer is not government. The answer is what all of us can do as individuals. And with government off our backs, prices go down naturally. Another one is the nullification of Judge Shelby's opinion regarding same-sex marriage. We have a state constitution, we have a U.S. constitution that has to be enforced. And if we allow that both documents to be trampled upon with same-sex marriage, well, just opening up the door for abuses, either if it's small businesses being sued because they will not cater to same-sex couples, or if it's ministers that's being sued because they won't because their faith doesn't allow them to believe in such practices. The First Amendment is under attack with this type of belief system that's encroaching upon our liberty. There are a number of other bills too, but nullification should be sufficient for the time being during the question. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We'll move to the Democratic candidate. The question clearly is this: do you primarily see yourself as a representative that would be offensive or defensive? Number one. And number two, do you have specific bills that you would like to see introduced into the hopper?
Well, thank you. I think that's a powerful question. As a Democrat in a Republican-controlled legislature, I would be defensive. I clearly would be defensive. I would clearly not be able to introduce with success too many bills by myself that would pass. I just know the process. It wouldn't happen in this state. I can try to bring forward bills that are statement bills, but they're not going to pass, and I don't think they're going to influence too many people, but I could try. And if I felt that was important, I would. And I have one or two that I would like to, but I would like to, and as a Democrat in Utah, especially as a conservative Democrat, who often finds himself having more in common with someone from a Libertarian or a different independent party or a Republican than with some of the Democrats, especially Salt Lake County Democrats. We tend to divide on some of those things. And by the way, if you looked at Utah County's Democratic platform and compared it to Salt Lake County's Democratic platform, you see on purpose, we've distanced ourselves. I'd have to work across the aisle with other people for every good idea they have. But I would want to stop all message bills that cost us to defend that aren't constitutional. I'd want to stop things that seem to, and not help as a defensive matter, bills that seem radical to me and that seem costly and don't seem to be fundamentally conservative. And to me, being somewhat defensive, and not especially in my first term in that body, having a whole lot of bills to offer is an appropriate conservative value. However, I would like to see, and maybe I could help others author this type of bill, because again, I don't think something authored by me is going to pass unless it gets great support from Republicans. I would like to see more transparency about where the budget comes from and goes to, especially about public education, especially where we've taken a specific percentage of the pie and taken it and given it to higher ed. And I'm in higher ed, I'm for higher ed, but that came away from K-12. Then we take a specific percentage of the total pie and gave it to road building recently. Well, that's a significant crowding out of public ed. And then people are upset when public ed goes and asks for a bond or something. And I'm going to suggest that our prosperity is dependent upon everyone having a very good education. Otherwise, we'll give people with the best education 2 votes, and people with poor education is 1 vote. And that won't work in a complicated democracy. And so I'll be basically, I think, especially in the first term, if I were there, defensive and trying to be what works and pragmatic. But I would like to work for more transparency and more fiscal responsibility.
All right, thank you very much. Now I've basically delivered the soft side to let everybody get along, to kind of let people articulate some of their ideas. They've told you what they would like to basically introduce to the voters and focus on as their representative. They've kind of told you what they believe in terms of party, in terms of platforms, in terms of ideas in general. Now, if it were me and I were running for office, and that's why I'll never run for office, I'm a political talk show host, not a politician, I'd take off the gloves and I'd be like Mike Tyson on Red Bull. Okay, that's what I'd do if I went up there. And buddy, I might not get anything passed, but I'd be in the media every single day. And my ideas would resonate with the people, and hey, would go from there to see what politicians want to do with that. But that's another topic. I bring that up to say now we're going to jump in with both feet, and we're going to ask some hard questions in terms of the differences between the candidates. We know they have genuine respect for each other, but we also know that they have differences of opinion. I'm going to start with education, because it's been a topic that's been mentioned multiple times. I think it's critical to understand. The Communist Manifesto has the 10th plank to be government school. To have a communist nation, you're going to have government school or public education as the order of the day. The Constitution, the supreme law of the land, on the other hand, says nothing about education whatsoever. Now, let's be very clear, that doesn't mean that education is not important to the founders. It doesn't mean that education doesn't have a vital role in society, because it certainly does. The question is how that education should go forth, how it should play a role in our lives. Who should do it? How should they do it? Where should the funding come? All those questions take center stage. So we'll start with we'll start with the Independent American Party candidate, and then we'll go to the Democratic candidate. Here's the question. What do you think needs to be done with education? The current education system, flat out, is too expensive and it's not sustainable. With that general statement in mind, it costs at least $10,000 per year per kid in school. I've got 8 children, for example. That would mean $80,000 a year for my kids alone. And then you ask the educators, how much money do you need? Do you want more money? How much do you need? And then they basically say, well, as long as you give us more, we'll talk about that then. And the number never ends, okay? They talk about blue sky in business. Well, the blue sky number is out of the stratosphere. But the point is, it's not sustainable as it currently stands. So the question is as follows. How should we handle education? Number one. And number two, how do we make it sustainable? Because no one disagrees that education is important. The big debate comes on how we should go about it. We'll start with the Independent American candidate.
Well,
it's Jason Christensen, by the way.
Oh, sorry, Jason Christensen. I keep forgetting to mention my name. Sorry about that. Education here in this country, and especially here in Utah, used to be some of the best around. But what happened? What happened is we allowed the federal government to create one ambiguous Department of Education for national standards across the board. National standards doesn't work for smaller areas or for individual states. You know, we've seen a decline since the 70s because thanks to the Department of Education. Either if it's No Child Left Behind or if it's Common Core or the next grandiose idea that the federal government likes to think about. We do have serious threats though right now, and the solution which will open up the door for what I want to do with education, making it a very viable option to get passed in this state. And that's the one good thing that Common Core is doing. And the threats that's coming through Common Core is it's awakening people to the point of enough is enough. So what I want to do is nullify the piece of legislation that created the Department of Education, bringing it back to the state of Utah, and then going a step further by offering up a constitutional amendment for our state constitution to bring it, to get rid of the state board of education and bring it back down to the local level, where teachers, administrators, and principals can finally decide the best course of action for those children to get the best education, like what once occurred in this country.
Thank you very much. We'll move to the Democratic candidate.
Scott Farron, thank you. When the U.S. Constitution was written, there was no system of public education. It was silent about that, and of course that reserved that to states, and so it's sort of a federalism issue. However, Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson and others were proposing a system of free public schools as opposed to the system that existed then of religious schools and pauper schools and good private schools. And so every state constitution that I'm aware of since then included in it a guarantee for public education. Those guarantees changed. Some say a free uniform public education. Some say different things about, Massachusetts says that the Legislative Assembly has the duty to cherish education. And in law, of course, we've had to decide what that means. So it's embedded within state constitutions and is an appropriate federalist view, federalism, pardon me, that states have the most power in there. So for me, I was invited by the government of Finland, and we look at Finland as now, we're talking about it as the greatest new educational system, and they do great things. Why don't we do what Finland does? So I was invited by Finland, and I met with their National Board of Education. I presented to all of their principals, and I saw their system. I traveled around, and I have a doctoral student that's Finnish, and we did research in Estonia nearby on language acquisition. And I got to tell you, if we want to do and get what Finland gets, then we got to take and pay the people like Finland pays their teachers. We've got to have people who get paid 6 figures. We've got to have people that has very little racial diversity and very little newcomers, and we're not willing to do the sorts of things that Finland does. So for me, if you're going to make public education or education sustainable and viable, and by the way, I believe it's the public education, mandatory, compulsory public education, as somewhat invented by Horace Mann, even though envisioned by Thomas Jefferson, but Horace Mann called it the balance wheel of society, and it's the greatest gift given. And I'm a product of public education, and I can still spell. And I would suggest to you that local control would be, that used to be the big reform movement, local control. Get great people and let them have a sense of mission and get out of their way. Let there be ways that we provide resources for homeschoolers, because there are different reasons that homeschoolers would leave. Their kids being bullied, or the family needs that experience right then, or that kid needs that then for a short time or a long time. But not every family has the resources to homeschool. Quite a lot of families have both parents working, or they just can't do it. And so I think we also need to pay people well, have local control. If you're paying people $30,000, I'm sorry, I'm just a little surprised that anyone would worry about anything else, because they do it for a sense of mission and purpose, and that's good. And so I would suggest a sustainable system. Quit the quick reform turnarounds with every new fad. Quit looking for one single silver bullet, and deal with good pedagogy. Deal with reading and literacy. Work to provide English acquisition for those who need it in every way. And take students who are from minority backgrounds and give them a chance to have respect and honor for their background, but also become part of the mainstream. And those are the basic things. I don't think there's one silver bullet. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Democratic candidate, I'm going to ask you a few questions just to either mark a similarity between the candidates or difference between the candidates. Jason wants to abolish the education department at the federal level, and he wants to abolish the state education as well and have it be completely local. You mentioned local as well. Would you stand to abolish the federal education department?
I probably would not. I wouldn't mind limiting what they do. And so right now I'd like to have them be engaged in helping states, in helping foment good research, in not controlling the agenda like they often are. But I think that there's a powerful role for resources to be put together. For example, I used to work at the National Center for Law and Education, and which we now no longer pay for legal services corporations, so there aren't national centers that are very powerfully paid for. You couldn't put that together on the local level very well. I would like to limit their power. I'd like to limit their control, and I'd like them to bow to states more. Well, next question for me is, would I get rid of the State Office of Education? I think with the State Office of Education, one of the things that happens is you get people who are being paid for by the program that's not sustained money, but it's the program they got money from say, for example, No Child Left Behind, they become the experts in it. Their salary is dependent upon No Child Left Behind. And so there is a dysfunction somewhat in state office of education. And that makes those people have a vested interest in maintaining things like No Child Left Behind or others. However, for some of the same reasons, I think we need to have a limited state office of education. For example, I think it's powerful to have the Professional Practices Committee, people that look at how and why a teacher needs to be lose their teaching license for being a pedophile or whatever reason. And it's hard to do all of that at the local level. So I would limit them more, but not abolish them. So that might be a difference, and I'll be glad to hear my opponent, or actually my friend, Jason.
All right, Jason, you can respond. He would not abolish those. You would. The next question that I have relates to a similar idea with regards to tenure. You know, for some reason in education and in government, they always set themselves up these special privilege scenarios. Tenure is one of them. If you serve as a teacher for a certain amount of time, pretty soon you're in, and it's very hard to remove you, to let you go, to demote you, to etc. You just seem to have this, you know what, I'm on the ladder of success, and now I've got my insider status to make sure that I stay there. And even if I do leave for whatever reason, I've kind of got my silver bullet pension parachute scenario. And so that's kind of the problem that we have. Jason, you can respond, the Independent American Party candidate can respond to the Democrat regarding keeping some of those departments and what he would do with them, and then to talk about this tenure idea. That drives the cost of education. I don't disagree that people should be paid more if they're great teachers, but is it based on a tenure where you're just kind of in like Flynn forever, or is it based on performance? How do we break that all down? So the Independent American Party candidate.
Jason Christensen. In regard to tenure, if we look at a great example of where tenure does not work is California. What happens is once you get all your benefits, you get all your pay, you're set for life. There's no incentive for you to compete, to have a want to make sure your students are being taught the correct principles. So no, I do not like tenure whatsoever. And thankfully, I don't believe Utah has tenure as an issue, but as of right now, thankfully. But yeah, I don't like tenure. In regards to getting rid of the State Board of Education, I think it's a complete disservice where you have, and thank goodness we did have a court recently deem it as unconstitutional, where you have a governor that picks who he wants to sit as the superintendent. So it's partisan based upon what the governor wants, and especially a governor that accepted that insidious Common Core program from the federal government. So by abolishing the state school board, it's up to, at that point, it will be up to the local communities to do their due diligence with the local school boards. You know, those races running right now, make sure they choose good and wise people there. Make sure you choose good and wise people at the city government levels in order to, okay, say how much are we going to pay? You know, allow teachers to be paid. How much are we going to allow superintendents to be paid? It's up to the people ultimately at the local levels. In regards to the federal government, you cannot reform the federal government at the state level, especially when the state is addicted to the federal funds. That always has strings attached. You know, follow the money, they say. You know, that's exactly how we got Common Core, following the money. So as long as we're addicted to that federal money, we're never going to be able to rein them in. Thank you.
All right, so the Independent American Party candidate, then, do you believe there's any role for government in education?
My personal beliefs are no, but given the state of where we are now, very limited when it comes to the local level, which is which shouldn't be a state legislature issue. It should be a local school board issue.
And last question for the Independent American Party candidate, do you support or reject Common Core?
Absolutely reject it. Get rid of it. It's vile, it's nasty. Our neighboring state of Nevada is having discussions of having sex ed at kindergarten level. In Colorado, in Aurora, Colorado, they'll already adopted that sex ed at those young ages. It's vile and nasty. And then to top it all off, you have the data mining, which Utah did adopt already, allowing corporations to track the children for the profit motives, as well as, and I suspect the piece of legislation will be coming up this session to strip out the founding era in AP history, because just a couple months ago, the education committee within the legislature were all in favor saying, yep, let's strip it out. So the current abuses with Common Core that makes all of us infurious, and the abuses that's coming, yeah, it needs to be defeated now before it gets worse.
All right, thank you very much. We'll move to the Democratic candidate, Mr. Scott Farron. And I know we've laid a little bit of a landmine for you in terms of a bunch of topics. They all do relate to education. I want to start out with, do you support tenure? Or would you rather see that rejected? Do you support Common Core, or would you rather see that rejected? Where do you stand on those issues?
Thank you, Scott Farron. First, let me reply to a couple of important things. The way state boards of education are selected varies around the United States. Hawaii, for example, has one board of education, period. That's all there is. There are no local boards of education, for example. Other places have direct appointment by the governor. Others have, election and things. Utah has one of the more, what term shall I use? Unique systems.
Interesting.
Interesting systems. Why it became unconstitutional, was ruled unconstitutional, I believe, was because it is so interesting, and a committee was put together to decide who got to be on the ballot. And that's part of what happens. And that committee doesn't necessarily represent the will of the people. And then from those, they go forward, and the governor gets to let them, a certain number run. The problem was that a colleague of mine, who's been a professor of educational administration for more years than me, was told, you don't have the background to be on the State Board of Education, so he didn't get to be a candidate by the committee. The problem is, people who were incumbents, who had been on the Board of Education, were told, you don't have the background to be on the Board of Education. Well, this is a slam dunk for a judge to find that the due process involved here is problematic at best. And so that's the reason they found it unconstitutional. I don't think it's because the governor at the end gets to appoint, because there are states where constitutionally they can appoint. But I hope that we'll change it, but I'm afraid that the state legislature now, there's a boxcar bill right now, there's a couple of them coming forward, but going to intend to have it be a partisan election, a direct partisan election, and then that's going to change things and remove a check and balance for public education, in my opinion. That's not good. On Common Core, I don't love Common Core, but I don't see it as the concern that Jason does, the same level. So let's talk about sex ed. Well, that sounds exciting. You'll be more interested in what I have to say. In Utah, we have a statute.
Just for our audio audience, there's no twerking involved.
Thank you very much. Our sex ed statute in Utah is one of those states divide into opt-in, then opt-out kind of statutes. They have different ways to look at it. Utah is an opt-in statute. We have 2 or 3 important safeguards for parents written by people I know. One who got his doctorate in our department, who had a lot of input into it. You're not allowed to answer as a teacher any spontaneous question about sex, period, while you're teaching a course. Parents are allowed to see the entire curriculum that will be taught, and then parents get to choose whether they come in or out. Common Core is not going to change that. And so I don't understand that fear exactly. I don't love Common Core, though. I think that part of our strength comes from diversity. But I don't have the exact same fear and concern. And then we have a few embedded questions. Tenure. I just have trouble seeing how people who are gonna start at 30,000, then spend 10 years going up 2% maybe, or maybe not, and now they're not prepared for something else,